Hello? Hello?
Smith is on.
Hi, is this Ed?
It is.
Hi, Ed, how are you?
Going well.
We're going to start in a couple minutes. I'll do a quick introduction and then I'll let you get started. I do have your PowerPoint in a shared view so the students can see it, and if you would be able to just prompt me, I'll try to follow as you're going along to forward your slides, but if you could let me know whenever you're ready to move on, I'll be happy to do that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And then we'll stop whenever you're ready and then open it up for a little bit of question and answer.
Okay, that's great.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. Welcome to the Spring 2012 session of the virtual seminar series offered through the Center for Disaster Research and Education. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Edward Smith, and I'll go through a brief bio and then we'll let Mr. Smith start with his talk. Edward Smith began his assignments as the Response Division Director at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Federal Emergency Management Agency, Region 3 office in Philadelphia in September 2009. During the course of that assignment, he led the preparation for 3 national special security events and the response to several blizzards and floods. Prior to becoming the Response Division Director, he served for 2 years as a Federal Coordinating Officer. As a member of the Federal Coordinating Officer cadre, he served as the Deputy FCO for floods in Ohio and Washington, ice storms in Iowa and Nebraska, and as the FCO for a severe winter storm in Wisconsin and floods in West Virginia. During the Hurricane Ike response, he served as the Area Field Office Director for Houston-Harris County and later as the Chief of Staff for the disaster. Before joining FEMA, Mr. Smith served as the Homeland Security Advisor for the state of Delaware. In that capacity, he was responsible for all Homeland Security-related initiatives and leading the state's critical infrastructure protection programs. He also served on the Delaware Fusion Center Governing Board, the state's Homeland Security Advisory Council, Grants Working Group, and the Area Maritime Security Council for Sector Delaware Bay. Mr. Smith served in the U.S. Army, Army Reserve, and Army National Guard for 32 years before retiring as a colonel in 2005. For the last 12 years of his career, he served as the Director of Military Support for the Delaware National Guard. His primary duty in that position was to plan for and coordinate all National Guard emergency response operations. He led the Guard's response to hurricanes, blizzards, oil spills, and preparation for Y2K. His education credentials include a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from Shippensburg University and a JD degree from Temple University. He is also a graduate of the U.S. Army War College and the Naval Postgraduate School Executive Leadership Program. Mr. Smith is a member of the International Association of Emergency Managers, where he served for 4 years as the co-chair of the Uniformed Services Committee. He has earned the Certified Emergency Manager designation and currently serves as the FEMA representative on the CEM Commission. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Smith and his talk, Field Experience, Validating and Supplementing Your Education and Training. Go ahead, please.
Well, thank you very much. It sounds like I should be 100 years old if I did all that stuff, but frankly, I'm not. I just had the good fortune to be able to work in a lot of fields that were very interesting to me, and I hope to pass on some of that kind of information to you. I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Yalda and the folks there at Millersville and the CDRE for allowing me to have this opportunity to address what I consider to be a very important group. As you probably know, the world of emergency management is changing rapidly, and the future belongs to people like you who have invested the time, the energy, the resources to better be prepared to meet the coming challenges that we address in this field every day. Most of my experience coming up through the ranks was on-the-job training, and that's not all bad, but you have a unique experience now to be able to learn about how the systems work before you have to implement those systems in the field. Having said that, let's move to the first slide. And what I'd like to show you on this first slide is what I call Ed Smith's Pillars of Emergency Management. It is my view of emergency management, and I don't think many people would argue it. I haven't really done a lot of research into this, but the reading that I've done tells me that folks in the field primarily talk about education, training, and experiences, the pillars that will make all of you better prepared to be emergency managers in this more demanding field that we're in today. I say more demanding today because it hasn't been that many years that we actually include the education piece of this preparation. The higher education part of emergency management training is only 10 or 15 years old for the most part, generally accepted. And even the training piece of emergency management has come along in the last 20 or so years, when before that, most of emergency management was in fact learned in the field. And on-the-job training was the training of the day. And today, we expect much more of emergency managers in the type of political and fiscal environment that we deal with today, and we expect them to be more professional. We expect them to have a lot more knowledge than those emergency managers when I started in this field. And that causes some consternation, I will tell you that, between some emergency managers who some would call old school, some would just call the predecessors or the builders, the foundation of the group that we have today. I can't imagine that these pillars themselves are controversial, although I will tell you that if you try to start a discussion as to which one is more important, you're likely to get into a very heated discussion. I'm not prepared to discuss that. One thing that I would like to concentrate on today is that experience part of the equation. I know you understand the education part, and I know that you will have an opportunity to do a lot of training. But for today, I'd like to focus on that last bullet. And what I consider that whole last bullet, experience. Experience comes in a lot of flavors. You know, there's a lot of things that we consider experience in emergency management. Experience can be gained from writing plans. It can be gained from assessing readiness. It can be gained from working in an EOC or some other multi-agency coordination center. It can be actually working exercises as a participant or as an observer controller. But what I'd like to talk about today is what I call boots on the ground field experience, and that's where a lot of my experience is, and that's what I would like to emphasize to you as an area that is maybe not as easy to obtain as others, but certainly is every bit as important and a lot of times more rewarding. Next slide, please. Slide 3, I talk about field experience, and I'm going to just spend some time and tell you why I think this is important, because I really think that this is an area where you can really make a difference and you can really gain some insight into the profession. That first bullet, or the first sub-bullet, direct contact with survivors, is probably the most important bullet in my mind, or might be the most important topic that I'm really going to talk about today. When I'm in the field as a federal coordinating officer, I require literally that every person in the Joint Field Office goes out into the affected area and interacts with the survivors. That's a little bit unusual. In a Joint Field Office, if you haven't ever been there, many of the jobs that are done in an office setting. They might include data entry. They might include writing worksheets. They might include observing or evaluating plans. But a lot of it is done in an office setting. If I'm in charge, every one of those folks goes to the field. Every one of those folks interacts with the survivors of the disaster, because that's where you really get a flavor for why we do what we do. You know, it's easy to sit in a classroom and talk about emergency management. It's easy to sit back in the EOC and talk about emergency management. It's easy to sit in that JFO, that Joint Field Office, and direct people to do things. But until you actually get out and you deal with the person who's just lost their house, or you deal with the person who's looking for their pet, or even worse, one of their family members, or you deal with the person who is trying to find a way to get to a shelter or figure out what they're going to eat, how they're going to eat the next day, until you've done those things, until you've had that direct contact with survivors, it's very difficult to understand why we do what we do and why it's so important to be as good an emergency manager as we possibly can. That next bullet, when I talk about ground truth regarding impact, even I use the term, when I talk about the level of a disaster, I usually talk about scale, scope, and scrutiny. And what I mean by that is, how big is it, how widespread is it, and who's watching it every day? Is it on CNN? A small event that's on CNN becomes a big event because everybody in the profession is looking at it. But even when it's at that level, that it's on CNN, you really don't get the true picture of the disaster until you get there on the ground. And that's really, I spent last April and the end of April, all of May, and a little bit of June in Alabama after the tornadoes that went through there on the 27th of April. And for the first day I was there, I was just absolutely amazed. I've worked a lot of disasters. I've worked hurricanes, I've worked flooding, I've worked blizzards, you name it. I've been involved in working disasters. That F5 tornado that stayed on the ground through the northwest part of Alabama, it tore things apart that I would have never imagined. Brick buildings with steel structural beams were twisted and gone. And I started to take pictures, and about the second day I just stopped taking pictures, and I don't think I took another picture the whole time I was there, not because there weren't things that were worthy of pictures, but because the pictures weren't doing justice to what I was seeing. And if you want to look at what, some other photographers have, how they've captured that, Google Phil Campbell or Hackleburg tornado, and you can get a good feel for what kind of devastation was there. But getting that ground truth and getting the feel for how bad things really are, it can be very important, and it is very important. And sometimes even when you're in charge, you have to go to the field just to see what you're really dealing with, because ground truth is important to your decision-making process. That next bullet refers to experience the fog of war. For you military buffs, you'll know that that's a term that Prussian military analyst Karl von Clausewitz is attributed to having said back in his book Clausewitz on War. Clausewitz would have been a great emergency manager, I can tell you, because the fog of war is a term that's used to describe the uncertainty in situations where you can't get a true picture of what's going on, and you've lost communications and the ability to obtain what we call today situational awareness. That happens in a major disaster. I can tell you that from experience. When the infrastructure is degraded, when you can't use your cell phone, when you can't use the landline phones, when the radio towers are down, you experience what is every bit as much fog of war as it would be in a war zone. It's very, very difficult to do a true assessment of what you're dealing with. Because of that, that's something that would cause you as a leader to have to go out to the field, and as a responder or a manager to have to go and see it for yourself, because you can't communicate and you can't tell, where, when you're in the business of prioritizing the use of limited resource, it's critically important that you have the ability to do an assessment of the situation, that you have sufficient situational awareness. People sometimes call it common operating picture, the view that everybody has so everybody understands what we're dealing with. That fog of war is something that you need to experience in order to be an effective emergency manager, so you know how to deal with it. That next bullet, I really, establishing a level of credibility, we've always used that term, been there, done that, got the T-shirt. And I will tell you that in the emergency management business, and particularly the emergency response business, sometimes the only way to have credibility with the people that you're dealing with is to have been there, done that, and got the T-shirt, because war stories and in war and in emergency management play a role. Being able to let people know that you understand what's going on, let people know that you understand what they're going through, whether they're a first responder or a survivor of the event itself. Empathy is a wonderful thing, and when you've been there and you've done that and you've got the T-shirt, you can empathize with folks, and you know what, in fact, they're dealing with. That's such an important thing. And I can't stress that enough, that the ability to know what people are dealing with in the field is a very critical thing that you'll need to develop. And that last bullet I talked a little bit about in the first bullet, and I don't mind repeating that one, because I think it's certainly very important, and that's that it validates the importance of what we do as emergency managers. I think we all need to feel that what we do in life is important. This field is probably one of the easiest to feel that, to get that feeling of self-worth, because you actually can see the results of what you're doing as a responder or as an emergency manager. And during an actual event, you can see things get better every day. Might not be directly attributable to you as a person, but it's attributable to the effort of all of those folks that are there, either as emergency responders or emergency managers, and that's a very good feeling to have. Next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about types of experience, because in order for you to gain experience, it's important that you know what you might want to get experience in. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about missions that are critical during a disaster. I take the time to do this because I believe that although technically these are probably emergency response and recovery roles, not so much emergency management, but you need to know them in order to manage them. Gaining field experience in any one of these mission areas will help you to be a better emergency manager. The more you understand the challenges, the more you understand the processes that are taking place out in the field, the better you'll be able to make decisions that people are counting on you to make. So that's why I take the time to talk about the type of experience that I would hope that you would take advantage of and try to gain some of this experience when you have an opportunity to do so. Gaining field experience in any one of these I don't know that any one is more important than another. I will tell you that I'll talk about all of them, but if you can understand as an emergency manager the part of emergency management that deals with feeding and sheltering folks, you will be a step ahead. That's an area that not a lot of people understand the intricacies of. A lot of people think, okay, you open a shelter and people come and that's, that, and then when we're done, they leave. But there is a tremendous amount of coordination, a tremendous amount of planning that goes into opening a shelter, feeding folks, and ensuring that they're cared for. Let me step back for a moment to the first bullet. When we talk about search and rescue, other than evacuation, which obviously is a proactive measure, the first reactive thing that we do when an event occurs is that search and rescue mission. That is probably one area that you could really make an impact in. I will tell you that having participated in some major disasters and having participated in the national level exercise last year that was focused on an earthquake, a major earthquake in the central portion of the United States, the New Madrid Fault area. Search and rescue was one of those areas that at the end of the day got put in the too hard to do column. And, we look at the search and rescue assets that we have as a nation, and we're second to none. We have a tremendous search and rescue capability, but it's not intended, nor can we afford to create a formal search and rescue capability that will address all of the issues of a major disaster like a New Madrid earthquake. We don't have the resources available or trained to do that. That's an area that as a volunteer you could make a difference in, and you could get some very valuable training in that arena. Feeding folks, that we take it for granted sometimes, and we don't even think about how people are without their power. They're displaced from their houses. How are they going to eat? We can supply MREs, and we do that. We can supply other off-the-shelf heater meals and things like that, and we do that. But the bottom line is somebody has to feed all those volunteers that are out there working. Somebody has to feed all the displaced folks that are out there that are looking to start their recovery process. And it's a tremendous amount of work that has to be done. And there are some really great groups, and we'll talk about groups in a few slides, but that's an area that's important for you to know as an emergency manager. It's critical, obviously, that people need to be able to eat, and we have to have a plan for that. Pet and animal care is, again, it's a tremendous challenge. Prior to Hurricane Katrina, we probably didn't spend as much time or energy worrying about pets and animals in disaster as we should have. And that became evident during Hurricane Katrina when we realized that what impacts a pet or other animal impacts the owner. So unless you have a plan for those pets and animals, you don't really have a plan for the survivors themselves. Many people will not leave their home even if they're in a mandatory evacuation area if they can't take their pet with them. Many people, farmers for instance, won't leave their farm if they don't have a plan for how to sustain the animals that are on that farm. Pet and animal care is a huge challenge, and it's one that since Katrina we've done a pretty good, as an industry, as a profession, we've done a pretty good job of planning for pets and for other animals. There's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of energy by volunteers and others that need to be applied to this challenge. PCEMRA, if you're not familiar with that, probably most of you are familiar with the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. It actually mandates that we plan for pets in all of our emergency management and disaster response planning. So, it's not just a good idea anymore. It's something that's actually the law. Go to the next slide, please. We'll talk about other types of experience and other missions. Transportation is something that we kind of overlook sometimes when we're looking at things that volunteers can do, but I will tell you that I've seen volunteers do an amazing job at providing transportation to the extent that I've seen folks during blizzards, four-wheel drive clubs, come forward and make critical deliveries of blood and other types of critical commodities, deliver doctors to hospitals. That kind of support is very critical when we're in a position where we've overwhelmed the normal capabilities that the locality or even the state or federal government has. Another area that I've seen volunteers play a very important role in transportation is the transport of survivors to and from shelters. What we sometimes forget is that a lot of folks don't have their own transportation. A lot of folks, and it was obvious in New Orleans, a lot of folks didn't get out of New Orleans because they had no way to get out of New Orleans. So volunteer transportation roles are there, and it's something that we'll talk about again later under organizations. Debris operations are I guess, kind of near and dear to my heart because nothing holds up the recovery process like debris. If you look at that bottom right picture on that slide, there's really no way that you can begin to recover in an area that has debris like what you're seeing there. And in a tornado event or hurricane event, debris is a tremendous problem. Nothing can happen, nothing can be rebuilt until the debris is gone. It was so important that during those what they call the days of devastation in Alabama, those 27 tornadoes that hit the state on the 27th of April last year, the government, the federal government, realized that debris removal, which is not normally a part of our mission on private property, we do reimburse under the public assistance program for debris removal from public ways, public property, from infrastructure. But we realized early on in Alabama that this debris, the debris was so widespread and there was so much debris that there was no way the recovery process would start until the private property debris removal part was complete as well. So we did something called Operation Clean Sweep that was heretofore unprecedented. It was, we actually did private property debris removal or paid for private property debris removal. And the justification for that was that we couldn't move forward with any of our other programs until that was done. Volunteers play a huge part in that. I will tell you, in Phil Campbell, one of the primary places that I spent time after those tornadoes, every weekend, and initially every week, there were thousands of volunteers there with chainsaws and trucks and loaders, and as it calmed down a little bit every weekend, again, there would be 4,000 or 5,000 volunteers coming down to help with that debris removal, which made it possible for those folks to move forward, for them to start to regain some sense of the new normalcy for their area. Communication support, we talked about a little bit already, or I talked about the fact that the communication systems are often and almost always degraded during disasters. The cell phone towers come down, the towers for landline phones come down. All of those things, or even your emergency radio towers sometimes come down. The one thing that, the one means of communication that is the most reliable in a disaster environment is the amateur radio folks with their HF radios and VHF radios, which they can easily reestablish. After a storm, it takes them very little time to put up their antennas in order for them to be back on the air. So they're a tremendous resource. If you have an interest in that, that's an area that it's important to understand, and there's no better way to understand it than by actually doing it. Next slide, please. One of the things, in order for you to get out there and do that, you have to position yourself to be able to do it. And I can't stress this enough. This is probably, if you ever intend to be a volunteer or work in the field in emergency management, the bullets that I put up here, and I'm sure there are others that I've missed, but these are bullets that will help you tremendously to be successful in your mission. First of all, the one thing that I really like to stress is that you need to find an organization that needs your help, and preferably not when the disaster happens. And I say that for a couple of reasons. But the primary reason is that you need to become organized. And there's nothing. The reason that's so important, and I probably am going to say it too many times, but there is a very big challenge in every disaster dealing with unorganized volunteers and dealing with unsolicited donations. That probably is, sometimes we refer to it as the disaster after the disaster. There are often truckloads, warehouses full of donated goods well after an event occurs, sometimes years after an event occurs. But the same holds true for volunteers. Everybody, I think it's human nature to want to help people. I think it's admirable that people want to help people. But unless you've taken the steps to prepare yourself to help, you actually become part of the problem rather than being part of the solution. After Katrina, when thousands and tens of thousands of volunteers showed up, it put a tremendous burden on their very limited, very almost non-existent infrastructure. If you have people, you have to have a place for those people to live. You have to feed those people. You have to have water for those people. So unless you have a very good, organized sustainment plan for yourself and other folks, you become part of the problem. And that's the last thing that you want to do as a volunteer in the field, is become a burden to those folks that are trying to get the recovery moving. The second bullet, complete their training program. That's a key thing, because I will tell you that some of the volunteer agencies that we'll talk about in a little while have some of the very best disaster training programs that you're going to find. Not only that, belonging to an organization often gives you access to courses and classes like here at EMI, where I am, that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. So taking their training, completing their program, whatever it is, whether it's their incident command system training, whatever they require you to do, make sure that you complete those requirements. And the third bullet, participate in their exercises. Can't stress that enough. I talked about experience earlier. Exercises are a great way to obtain experience. They're a great way to find out how this process that you're about to get involved in really works. What part am I going to play? What's my role in all of this? And how does it fit into the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish as an organization? So most of these organizations that we'll talk about have their own exercise programs, and for very good reason. That next bullet, prepare yourself, that you would not believe how many people, how many volunteers come to a disaster site without the ability to sustain themselves, without the ability to take care of themselves. And, when you go to a disaster, it's not always going to be, and it's very seldom going to be, staying in a Marriott. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you stay in places you wouldn't expect. But very often in the degraded atmosphere, you're going to be staying in a place where you might be in a tent. You might be, I know in Hurricane Ike, the first 2-3 days, I slept in my car. I wouldn't recommend that, particularly if you have a bad back, but sometimes that's the best you can do in an environment where there's no power, there's no water, there's no support plan. So you need to prepare yourself for survival in an environment like that. You need to be capable of taking care of yourself, or again, you become part of the problem. One of the things I can't stress enough is the fact that if you take medication, you need to ensure that you have that medication enough to can at least sustain you for as long as you plan to be there, because it's very unlikely you're going to be able to get it in that type of an environment. It's hard for us to imagine if you haven't done it, but some days in some areas it's hard to get gas, let alone to get some kind of prescription medicine. It's hard to get bottled water. It might be hard to get ice. There are a lot of things that we take for granted that are going to be not available, or available in very limited supplies during the actual disaster response phase. So that's something you have to be able to do. You have to be able to sustain yourself in that environment. Ensure that you have a support plan. Well, what I mean by that is that if you have pets, you need to make arrangements for those pets for if you are deployed somewhere. If you have children, hopefully, if you have children, you would make a plan for that. But if you have to take care of a relative, you need to plan for that. If you have to be, if you have commitments, financial or otherwise, that you need to attend to, then you have to make a plan to do those if you're deployed suddenly. Because that last bullet, that remain flexible, is kind of important. You have to, if you actually want to deploy to disasters and gain experience through field work, you have to be flexible and what I call it jokingly, maintaining that rigid state of flexibility. Unless you're flexible, you're not going to be able to pick up and go when the need exists. So you have to maintain that flexibility. Next slide, please. I talked earlier about finding an organization that fits you, and boy, that's so important, because you really, in order to do something that you're going to enjoy doing, you have to find an organization that fits with what your needs, desires, and lifestyle is. A good place to start looking is the VOAD, the Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. That's not that's a fairly recent concept. I think in 1990 it was originally around that period, originally understood as a need. We need to have somebody who, or some place that organizes these various volunteer agencies. And if you go to a large disaster site, you'll find that volunteer management, in other words, figuring out what agency is going to do what and when they're going to do it, is a huge part of the challenge. And volunteer management is a very critical part of emergency management. If you've listened to anything that Craig Fugate has said in the last couple of months or last year, you'll know that we've recognized, and hopefully the whole country has recognized, that disaster response and recovery is a whole community process. You know, it's not just FEMA, it's not just the state, it's private nonprofits, it's volunteer organizations, it's, you know, EMAC folks coming in from other states. We need to tap all of those folks because that's the only way we can accomplish what we have to do. Volunteer management is a bigger and bigger part of all of that we're talking about. The American Red Cross is one I think that's known to most everyone. The Red Cross does a tremendous job in shelter management, but they also do a lot of other things. They do critical needs blood drives. They do commodities, feeding stations. They do just, you name it, the Red Cross is involved with it. But one thing you might not know about the Red Cross is they have their own training program. And I guess I told you before, most of these folks have their own training program. But the Red Cross is probably ahead of most of them in that they've developed a program called Masters of Disaster. Now, it's not a degree-producing program. Don't want to get anybody nervous there, but Masters of Disaster is a curriculum it really centered around being ready to respond to disaster. So it's something that you might want to look at, and you know, just in some of those courses that they offer, you can do just as standalone courses. There are a lot of other organizations that do good work. Humane League and the Humane Society, in particular, do a lot of work with animal care, and they have their own training program. You know, they have folks designated as disaster relief specialists. And if you go to their website, and don't worry about I've included some links to websites at the end of the presentation. That'll be a good place for you to get started. But you know, it's really amazing how much these folks have done. And when you look at their website, you'll see their statistics of how many people they've deployed in the last year, how many people they've fed in the last year, how many people they've sheltered, and it's really an amazing number. And you can't go wrong with joining and helping out with one of these particular organizations. We'll step on the next slide 8, to faith-based organizations. And boy, I tell you, I had no idea before I got into this business how critical and how big a capability the faith-based organizations bring to the table. I mean, they are a tremendous partner in disaster response and recovery. I've listed some there. The Salvation Army, I think probably most of you have dealt with them in some way. Southern Baptist, United Methodists have something called UM-Corps that's becoming almost rivals the Salvation Army and the Southern Baptists in what they do during disasters. Catholic Charities is a big player in disaster response. They work case management. They work a lot of different crisis counseling issues. There's a lot that they provide. So, you know, I'm not going to recommend any one of these to you. I would like to tell you a quick story about the Mennonite Disaster Relief folks. You know, they call it their binational headquarters. It's their headquarters for the United States and Canada is in Lititz, Pennsylvania. So it's not too far from Millersville. But I've had an opportunity over the years to meet with some of those folks in the field, and when I was in Northwest Alabama last year, I was at a town hall meeting with the mayor of one of the small towns there. I think it was either Phil Campbell or Hackleburg, and it was Phil Campbell. And he wanted to introduce me to the Mennonites who were he had invited a representative there because they were building houses for them. And I talked to the person who it was obvious to me he was Amish. He was the full beard and the full Amish tradition. And I talked to him for a little bit, and I introduced myself, and he introduced himself as Dale Lapp. And I said, boy, that's a familiar name from where I'm from. I said, there are a lot of Lapps around us. He said, where are you from? And I said, Lancaster County. He said, well, we're from Pequea. We're from down around nickel mines. And we got to talking and found out that there's a huge group of folks from Lancaster County in Alabama working to, number one, remove the debris, clear debris so that the recovery effort could take over, and to rebuild houses for the folks that had lost their homes down there. And I will tell you, I was only in Alabama for a month, but the day I left Alabama, they turned over the keys to the first house that they built. So even though they spent the first week doing debris cleanup and base camp structuring, 3 weeks later they were turning the keys over on a brand new one-story house to a disaster survivor that otherwise would have had no place to live for who knows how long. It was an amazing, uplifting story for me, and I took away from that a whole new respect for what they do. That last one, the Islamic Circle of North America, when I spent 3 months in New Jersey after Hurricane Irene, they provided some tremendous resources up there. They do similar relief activities to Salvation Army and others. You know, what's really impressive when you go to one of these disaster sites is that you'll find a base camp where all these folks are they're set up one next to the other to provide for mobile feeding kitchens and things like that, and they'll set up a huge base camp, and there will be no worries about anybody getting along or working together, because that's just part of what they do. It's an interagency, interfaith cooperation like no other that you've ever seen. Next slide, please. I threw this up real quickly. The Civil Air Patrol does a tremendous job. A lot of people don't really understand what they do. I think a lot of people pretty much know that they do search and rescue, but Civil Air Patrol also does other kinds of operations. They have a pretty substantial, pretty robust communications capability. I used them in particular in West Virginia on one disaster that I worked where we had an ongoing search and rescue mission that was on the ground, but we actually had some children that we couldn't locate, but we also couldn't communicate, and we put one of their airplanes, fixed-wing airplanes, up in what they call a figure-8 pattern, and they became an aerial repeater for the people that were working on the ground. It was a resource that I hadn't really thought about, but they have that capability. They also have the capability to transport critical needs. So if you have that blood that needs to go or to come to your area from somewhere else, they can do that as well as transport people. The National Guard, that's kind of the area that I came from, so it's near and dear to my heart. I'm not a recruiter, never have been, but I will tell you that I gained a tremendous amount of emergency management experience working in the National Guard. Point of distribution support, I put that at the bottom because that one is not necessarily tied to an organization. And every area that you go to will have a different plan for point of distribution, for running pods. And that's critical because although there are a lot of agencies, FEMA for one, that can get commodities to a certain point, there has to be a plan for distributing them to the end user, to the survivor. And that's what those points of distribution are, and that's why it's so critical that every jurisdiction have a a plan for how they're going to do that pod support, that point of distribution support. There is if you're interested in that, there was a joint class or publications put together by the Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and FEMA. It's in the FEMA catalog, EMI catalog, under IS-26. So if it's something you're interested, if you want to adopt a pod, if you want to talk to your local emergency management agency about what their plan is, it might be some area that you could gain some experience and some expertise in, and it's certainly an area that's needed every time there's a significant disaster. I touched on a point that I'd like to kind of expand upon, then we'll move on. But if you're really interested in trying to get involved in gain some disaster experience, most states have on their website somewhere a volunteer page now, a place where you can go if you are looking to volunteer to do something. And that's a good place to start. Citizens Corps, CERT, those kind of things, they're great opportunities for you to gain training, to gain knowledge, and possibly to be very useful down the road. Next slide. Volunteer fire organizations, I won't talk about that too much. Most of you know what they are. Forest fire crews, tremendously valuable training because they work in an ICS environment, an incident command system environment. They really provide a lot of training for working in austere conditions as well, because unlike your local volunteer fire organizations, they train to deploy, and they do often deploy. And I'll tell you, my first introduction to emergency management was when I was a member of the Mount Joy Elizabethtown Forest Fire Crew, and because I had a boat, I was asked to help take people off of rooftops during Hurricane Agnes. So that was my first entree into the emergency response, emergency management field. Those I talked about CERT a little bit already. AmeriCorps, you look that up, they have it's an opportunity to serve there. And I can't say enough about Habitat for Humanity. Like what the Amish and Mennonites were doing in Phil Campbell, the Habitat for Humanity provides those same kinds of services. I'm really not going to talk about the next slide, which is the links. I threw them on there just to give you a little bit of a head start if you're looking for places to serve, if you're looking for places to gain that kind of experience. Next slide, please. I won't read that, but, that's my feeling. I don't think there is anything more rewarding than helping somebody who's just had maybe the worst day of their life. So that's all I have, and I'll go to try to answer any of the questions you might have. I'm pretty close to my 10 minutes reserve.
Thank you so much. Great talk, and thank you for sharing all the resources. It's obviously very beneficial. So thank you again. And I wanted to open it up. We have a number of students that have joined us today. So does anyone have any questions? Okay, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. It was great. I did an internship at the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency working on a catastrophic logistics plan. It was very interesting. I noticed that the majority of the organizations you recommended are focused on response. And yet, as emergency managers, we're not really responders. So I'd be looking for experience that would be more general in terms of planning, mitigation, that sort of thing.
The reason is I concentrated on the field experience part of it. That's other internships or other opportunities are tremendously beneficial. Today, my topic was focused on the field part of it, but I totally understand your point, and we are not emergency responders. My counter to that would be we manage emergency responders. And emergency managers are actually responsible for making decisions on what responders go where in many cases, for what capabilities go where we're going to put shelters, how we're going to feed those folks. So that's the real reason that I tried to focus this very brief session just on the response and recovery piece. But I agree totally with the need for experience in those other areas.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So I have a question. I think you may know that we have a CERT team that was developed last year at Millersville University. And one of the things that the university administration kind of quickly brought to our attention when we first developed the training was that they really were hesitant about having students be involved in response because of liability issues. But then since we've been offering the training, we've gotten a lot of student interest, and of course as students go through the training, they become even more interested in being involved in response and as you said, sort of boots on the ground. So what is your recommendation in terms of maybe taking our CERT program, and we've opened it up to the community, by the way, and we've had individuals from outside of the university join the training, which has been highly beneficial for the students. But what would be your recommendations in terms of maybe steps that we can take to maybe partner so then the students can have response opportunities without making the university nervous?
I think that having CERT is tremendous. That's a great idea, and frankly, CERT is designed for you to be better prepared to help your particular area, your community, if something happens to your area. That's not designed as a deployable program, frankly. It's designed to help you help yourself. And anything that you can do to be better prepared to help yourself and your neighbors and your community is certainly worthwhile. The liability issue is really the Good Samaritan laws in just about every state cover the actions of somebody who's helping in a disaster. Obviously, if you go do something illegal or go beyond the standards of good conduct, you might put yourself in a bad position. But frankly, I wouldn't worry about that part of it. And I have taught CERT classes for universities, and they're some of the best audiences, I think, and they're some of the most challenging and rewarding sessions that I've ever taught. I think that's a great opportunity. I think anything that you can do, there's a movement afoot now. We've talked about ready communities and ready cities, and now there's a movement afoot at FEMA to create ready universities, ready colleges, and part of our outreach to the higher education community is taking that other track, not just how do you train people to be emergency managers, but how can you help your community, your university be better prepared to respond to a disaster or to an active shooter or to anything else. Being able to make a difference there is directly related to your prior preparation. So anything you can do along those lines, including the Ready Campus kind of environment, I would certainly recommend and applaud you for doing.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. And actually, we've had our graduate assistant here has met with someone that is starting that Ready University, and they want us to be involved. So we're very excited about it. But thank you. That's really helpful to hear that perspective. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, Dr. Yolda. I just wanted to recommend you might want to speak with Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh. They actually operate an EMT program, and they have students that act as first responders on their campus. You might want to contact them to see how they deal with their liability.
Great. Thank you, Keith. We'll definitely look into that. Any other questions? All right. So thank you again. We really appreciate your time and the valuable information you shared, and also thank you for letting us know that you have instructed for CERT. So we may bug you as we go through and expand our training.
I absolutely enjoy doing that. I put my email address. It's the simplest one you can have. It's edward.smith@fema.gov on that last slide. So if you think of questions afterwards, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll be glad to get back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I know this is sort of these online venues are hard, but the students are clapping. I just want you to know that they're typing, showing up that they're clapping and saying thank you. So thank you so much, and have a great weekend.
You too. Take care now.
Bye.